The Boatman's Journey, a motivational story of struggles, hope, and victory. Chapter 1. The Silent River. The sun was setting over the vast river, casting golden reflections on the water. In a small wooden boat sat an old boatman named Kareem. His hands, rough from years of rowing, gripped the oars firmly. The river was his life, his home, and his biggest challenge. Kareem had spent decades ferrying people from one shore to another. Some paid well, some barely had a coin to spare, but he never refused anyone. Yet, deep inside, he carried a sorrow that no one could see. His dreams had drowned in the waves long ago, but his heart still hoped for a brighter day. One evening, as he prepared for his last ride of the day, a stranger stepped into his boat. The man, dressed in a fine coat, looked around curiously. "You have spent your whole life on this river, haven't you?" he asked. Kareem nodded. "Yes, this river knows my story better than I do." The stranger smiled. "Tell me your story, old man. I have time." Kareem took a deep breath. The river was silent, the wind was gentle, and for the first time in years, he felt ready to share his journey. Chapter 2. A Life of Storms. Kareem dipped his oars into the river, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I was not always a boatman," he began. "Once, I had dreams like everyone else. I wanted to learn, to build, to rise above the life I was born into. But fate had other plans." The stranger listened intently as Kareem continued. "I was the only son of my parents. My father was a fisherman, my mother sewed clothes to earn a little extra. We had nothing but a small hut by the river. Every night, I dreamt of leaving this place, finding a better life in the city. But life does not give choices to the poor," Kareem sighed. "When I was 15, my father fell ill. There was no money for medicine. I had to leave school and take over his boat. I promised myself it would only be for a while. But days turned into months, months into years. Before I knew it, the river had become my whole world." The boat rocked gently as he spoke. "I fought many storms, both on the water and in my heart. The river tested me in ways I never imagined. Some nights, the waves were so strong, I thought I would not see the morning. But I survived. Not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice." The stranger nodded, as if understanding the weight of Kareem's words. "And yet, you are still here. Do you regret it?" Kareem smiled faintly. "Regret? No. The river gave me sorrow, but it also taught me resilience. Every storm passed. Every dark night led to a new dawn. Life is the same. No matter how hard it gets, if you keep rowing, you will find the shore." Chapter 3. The Darkest Night. One evening, many years ago, a terrible storm hit the river. Kareem had been ferrying a family across when the sky turned black. The winds howled, the waves crashed against his boat, and fear filled the air. The mother clutched her child tightly. "Please, save us," she cried. Kareem knew the river well, but that night, even he was afraid. The boat swayed violently, water splashing over the sides. His hands ached as he tried to steer, but the storm was too powerful. For the first time in his life, Kareem felt helpless. This might be the end, he thought. But then he heard a voice inside him whisper, "Do not give up. Keep rowing." With all his strength, he fought against the storm. His arms burned, his heart pounded, but he did not stop. He rode through the darkness, through the fear, through the pain. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the storm began to fade. The sky cleared, and the shore appeared in the distance. Tears streamed down the mother's face as she stepped onto land. "You saved us," she said. Kareem, exhausted, only nodded. That night, he realized something important: no storm lasts forever. If you hold on, if you keep fighting, you will find safety. As he finished his story, Kareem looked at the stranger. "That night changed me. It taught me that strength is not in avoiding storms, but in facing them." The stranger smiled. "A wise lesson, old man." "And what happened after that?" Kareem chuckled. My story is not over yet. There were still more storms to come, but also moments of joy. If you want to hear the rest, you must stay a little longer. And so, under the moonlit sky, the boat continued its journey, carrying not just passengers, but stories of courage, sorrow, and hope. Chapter 4. A light in the darkness. The boat glided smoothly over the calm waters, the storm now just a memory. Kareem took a deep breath and continued his story. After that terrible night, something changed inside me. I was no longer just a boatman, I became a man with purpose. I realized that every journey, no matter how difficult, has an end. But the way we face the journey is what defines us. The stranger listened carefully. "Did you ever think of leaving this life behind?" he asked. Kareem smiled. "Many times. But then I remembered, this river is not my enemy. It is my teacher. It has taught me patience, resilience, and most importantly, gratitude. I have seen rich men with everything, yet they are never satisfied. And I have seen poor fishermen with nothing, yet their hearts are full of joy. I chose to be grateful for what I have." The wind whispered across the water, carrying Kareem's words into the night. "You see, happiness is not about what you own. It is about finding peace within yourself. I learned that the hard way, but I am glad I did." The stranger nodded. "That is wisdom, old man. More valuable than gold." Kareem chuckled. "Maybe. But wisdom does not come easily. It comes from struggles, pain, and loss. And I have seen plenty of that in my time." Chapter 5. The day I lost everything. Kareem's face darkened as he recalled the most painful day of his life. "There was a time when I had a family, a wife, a son. They were my whole world. My wife was the kindest woman I had ever known, and my son was my pride, my little warrior." The stranger leaned forward, sensing the weight of Kareem's words. "But one fateful day, everything changed," Kareem continued. "It was a bright morning when my wife and son went to visit her parents in the next village. The river was peaceful, the sky clear. There was no sign of danger." He paused, his hands tightening around the oars. But by evening, the storm came. Not like the ones I had faced before. This one was different. It was sudden, merciless. The boat they were traveling in never reached the other shore. Silence filled the air. The only sound was the gentle splash of water against the boat. "I searched for days," Kareem whispered. "I begged the river to return them. But the river only answered with silence." The stranger's eyes softened. "I am sorry," he said quietly. Kareem sighed. "That day, I lost not only my family but also my faith in life. I became bitter, angry. I blamed the river, I blamed fate. For months, I refused to touch my boat. I wanted to leave, to run away from this cursed water. But then," he said, his voice steady, "I realized something. The river did not take them from me out of cruelty. Life and death are not in our hands. I could drown in sorrow, or I could honor their memory by continuing to live. And so, I chose to row again. Not just to survive, but to find meaning in my journey." Chapter 6. The choice to live. The night air grew cooler, the moon reflecting on the gentle waves. Kareem stared at the water, his mind lost in the past. "That was the hardest decision of my life," he admitted. "To wake up every day, to keep going, even when my heart was shattered." The stranger studied him. "And did you ever find happiness again?" Kareem smiled faintly. "Happiness is a strange thing. It does not always come in the way we expect. I never remarried, never had another child. But I found joy in small things, the laughter of a child in my boat, the kindness of a stranger, the beauty of a sunrise over the river." He turned to the stranger. "Life does not give us what we want. It gives us what we need to grow. And pain, though bitter, is often the greatest teacher." The stranger nodded in deep thought. "You are a remarkable man, Kareem. Your story is not just about sorrow, it is about strength, about choosing life even in the face of loss." Kareem chuckled softly. Perhaps. But I am just a simple boatman, telling stories to pass the time. The boat continued its slow journey, carrying two souls, one who had seen life's deepest sorrows and still chose to row forward, and one who was just beginning to understand the true meaning of resilience. Chapter 7. The river never stops. The boat rocked gently as Kareem took a deep breath. The night was quiet, only the sound of water touching the wooden sides of the boat filled the air. The river never stops, he said softly. No matter what happens, it keeps flowing. And so must we. The stranger looked at him with curiosity. But isn't it exhausting? To keep moving forward despite everything? Kareem smiled. Yes, it is. But stopping is not an option. If I stop rowing, the boat will drift aimlessly, and I will lose my way. Life is the same. No matter how tired we are, we must keep going. Because somewhere ahead, there is a shore waiting for us. The stranger nodded, deep in thought. Kareem had lived a life full of storms, yet he had not given up. He had lost everything but still found reasons to wake up each morning. Tell me, the stranger said, was there ever a moment when you truly felt at peace? Kareem chuckled. Yes, many times. And each time, it was because of the small things. A warm meal after a hard day's work. The sight of a bird flying freely in the sky. The laughter of a child sitting in my boat. Peace does not come from wealth or power. It comes from within. Chapter 8. The weight of regret. Kareem's face darkened for a moment. But I do have regrets, he admitted. Not for what I lost, but for the things I never did. The stranger raised an eyebrow. Like what? Kareem sighed. I never told my father how much I respected him. I never told my mother how much I loved her before she passed. And my wife. I never told her enough how grateful I was for her presence in my life. He looked up at the sky. We always think we have more time. But time is like the river, it does not wait for anyone. The stranger remained silent, absorbing Kareem's words. So, what would you tell someone who still has time? Kareem's eyes shone with wisdom. Tell them to speak before it's too late. To love without hesitation. To forgive before regret becomes a burden too heavy to carry. And to live, truly live, without waiting for the perfect moment. The stranger nodded. Wise words, old man. Kareem chuckled. Wisdom comes from making mistakes. And I have made plenty. Chapter 9. The day I was tested. The river stretched endlessly before them, its surface calm and silent. But Kareem knew better than to trust its stillness. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it, he said. The stranger tilted his head. How so? Kareem's grip tightened on the oars. There was a time when I almost lost my boat. It was my only source of livelihood, the last piece of my father's legacy. One day, a group of men came, demanding money I did not have. They threatened to take my boat away. The stranger's expression hardened. What did you do? Kareem smiled. I did what I have always done, I faced the storm. I refused to give up, and instead, I worked harder. Day and night, I ferried people across the river, saving every coin. It took me months, but I paid my debts. And in doing so, I learned a lesson. The stranger leaned forward. And what was that? Kareem's eyes twinkled. That nothing in life is truly lost unless you choose to give up. No matter how difficult the situation, there is always a way forward. You just have to keep rowing. Chapter 10. The traveler's revelation. The boat neared the shore, and the stranger sighed. You know, Kareem, I did not step into your boat by chance, he admitted. Kareem raised an eyebrow. Oh? The stranger smiled. I came here searching for answers. I am a man who has everything, wealth, status, power. But I have felt empty, as if something is missing. And now, I realize what it is. Kareem chuckled. And what have you discovered? The stranger looked at him with deep respect. That happiness is not in what we own, but in how we live. That true strength is not in avoiding pain but in enduring it. And that no matter what happens, we must keep moving forward. Kareem nodded. You have learned well, my friend. The river teaches everyone who listens. The boat reached the shore, and the stranger stepped onto solid ground. He turned back one last time. Thank you, old man. I will remember this journey for the rest of my life. Kareem smiled. And I will remember you, traveler. May your life be full of meaning. As the stranger walked away, Kareem pushed his boat back into the river. The journey was over for one passenger, but for the boatman, the river would always call him forward. Because no matter what, he would keep rowing until the very end. Chapter 11. The river's whisper. The boat drifted gently over the water as Kareem gazed at the sky. The traveler was gone, but his words lingered in Kareem's mind. Happiness is not in what we own but in how we live. It was a truth Kareem had learned through years of hardship, yet hearing it from a stranger made him reflect deeper. The river whispered to him, its soft waves telling a story only a boatman could understand. Every ripple carried a lesson, every current held a secret. This river has seen my sorrow, my loss, and my victories, Kareem murmured to himself. It has taken much from me, but it has also given me something precious, resilience. As he rowed forward, he noticed another traveler waiting at the shore. A woman, her face hidden beneath a scarf, carrying a small bundle. She stepped into the boat cautiously. Where to? Kareem asked, his voice gentle. Anywhere but here, she whispered. Kareem studied her carefully. She looked tired, worn by life's hardships. He had seen many like her, souls searching for escape, hoping the river would wash away their past. The river does not erase the past, Kareem said as he pushed the boat forward. But it does teach us how to carry it differently. She looked at him, startled. You speak as if the river is alive. Kareem chuckled. Maybe it is. It listens when no one else does. She fell silent, staring at the water. Chapter 12. A burden too heavy. The boat rocked gently as the woman held the bundle closer to her chest. Kareem could see the sorrow in her eyes, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on her. Would you like to share your story? Kareem asked softly. She hesitated, then sighed. I had a home once, a family. But life can be cruel. When my husband died, I was left alone to care for my son. His family did not accept me, and I had nowhere to go. So, I ran. Kareem nodded, his heart aching for her. Running does not always mean escape. Sometimes, it is the only way to survive. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Do you believe we ever truly heal from loss? Kareem sighed. Healing is not about forgetting. It is about learning to live despite the pain. I lost my wife and son to this river, yet I am still here. Not because I have forgotten them, but because I choose to honor them by continuing forward. She listened carefully, her fingers tightening around the bundle. Then perhaps there is hope for me too. Kareem smiled. There is always hope. You just have to keep rowing. Chapter 13. The dawn of a new beginning. As the boat neared the opposite shore, the woman's grip on the bundle loosened. The sun began to rise, casting a golden glow on the river. For the first time in a long while, Kareem saw something in her eyes, relief. Thank you, boatman, she whispered. For listening. Kareem nodded. The river listens to all who seek its wisdom. Remember, no matter how strong the current, you are stronger. She stepped off the boat, her steps steadier than before. As she disappeared into the morning light, Kareem smiled to himself. Life was a river, always moving, always changing. Some journeys ended, and others began. But as long as he had his boat, he would keep rowing, guiding lost souls toward new beginnings. Because no matter what, the river never stops, and neither would he. Chapter 14. The storm approaches. The river had been calm for days, but Kareem knew better than to trust its silence. The sky, once clear, now darkened with heavy clouds. A strong wind whispered warnings, rustling through the trees along the shore. Kareem tightened his grip on the oars. He had faced many storms before, but each one carried a different lesson. The river was a great teacher, always testing him, always pushing him to his limits. As he rowed, he noticed a young man standing at the edge of the shore, hesitating. His clothes were torn, his face filled with uncertainty. "Are you coming?" Kareem called out. The young man hesitated, then stepped into the boat, his hands shaking slightly. "Where do you need to go?" Kareem asked as he pushed the boat forward. The young man exhaled deeply. "I don't know. I just need to get away." Kareem nodded. "Running from something?" The young man avoided his gaze. "From myself." Kareem smiled knowingly. The river may take you far, but you can never run from yourself. The first drop of rain hit the wooden surface of the boat. The storm was coming. Chapter 15. The fear within. The wind howled through the trees, and waves began to rise around them. The young man gripped the sides of the boat tightly. "I've never been in a storm before," he admitted, his voice shaking. Kareem continued rowing, his face calm. "Storms are just part of the journey. Fear makes them seem worse than they are." The young man's hands trembled. "What if we sink?" Kareem chuckled. "I have crossed this river 1,000 times. I have seen storms much worse than this. And yet, I am still here." The young man watched him in awe. "How do you stay so calm?" Kareem looked at the swirling water and smiled. "Because I trust myself. I trust the boat. And most importantly, I trust the river." The young man frowned. "Trust the river? But it's dangerous." Kareem nodded. "Yes, it is. But danger is part of life. You can either fear it or learn how to navigate through it." Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a deep rumble of thunder. The young man took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Kareem rowed forward, unshaken. "Storms pass, my friend. They always do. The question is, will you let it break you, or will you learn from it?" The young man swallowed hard, watching Kareem closely. For the first time, he wondered if this old boatman was not just a man, but a guide sent to teach him something far greater than crossing a river. Chapter 16. Strength in the storm. The waves crashed harder against the boat, rocking it dangerously from side to side. The young man gripped the wooden edges tightly, his knuckles turning white. His breath was uneven, his heart pounding in fear. Kareem, however, remained steady, his hands firm on the oars. His face showed no panic, only deep focus. "Why aren't you afraid?" the young man finally shouted over the howling wind. Kareem smiled slightly. "Fear is natural, but letting it control you is a choice. I've faced many storms, and I've learned one thing: they always end." The young man shook his head. "But what if this one doesn't?" Kareem's grip tightened on the oars. "Then I will keep rowing until my last breath. Because fear does not decide my fate, I do." Lightning flashed again, illuminating Kareem's face for a brief second. The young man saw something in his eyes, an unshakable determination, the kind only a man who had suffered greatly could have. "Take the oar," Kareem suddenly said, pushing one towards him. The young man hesitated. I don't know how to row." "Then this is the perfect time to learn." The young man swallowed his fear and grabbed the oar. At first, his movements were clumsy, uncoordinated, but Kareem guided him. "Feel the water, don't fight it. Move with it, not against it." Slowly, the young man found a rhythm. The storm was still strong, but with each stroke, he felt a little less afraid. Kareem nodded in approval. "Good. You're stronger than you think. Remember this moment, because in life, the storms will come. But now, you know how to row through them." For the first time since stepping into the boat, the young man felt something strange, not fear, but hope. The storm had not yet passed, but he was no longer afraid of it. Chapter 17. The eye of the storm. For a brief moment, the storm seemed to ease. The wind slowed, and the waves settled into an eerie calm. The young man wiped his forehead, his muscles aching from rowing. "Is it over?" he asked breathlessly. Kareem shook his head, looking up at the dark sky. "No. We're in the eye of the storm. The worst is still ahead." The young man's heart sank. "Then what do we do?" Kareem smiled. "We prepare. Life does not warn us before hardship comes, but when we get a moment of peace, we must use it wisely." Kareem pulled a rope from the boat and secured the oars, ensuring they wouldn't be lost if the storm got worse. He checked the wooden planks for any leaks and made sure the boat was balanced. The young man watched him closely. "You do this every time?" "Every time," Kareem nodded. "Because survival isn't about luck, it's about readiness." The young man exhaled slowly. He had spent his life running from challenges, believing that hardship was something to avoid. But now, watching Kareem, he realized something: strength isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about learning how to face it. Thunder roared in the distance. The storm was coming back. And this time, they were ready. Chapter 18. Against the current, the wind howled once more, and waves began to crash against the boat. The young man grabbed the oars, his hand steady this time. "Row with me," Kareem instructed. Together, they pushed against the raging current. The boat swayed dangerously, but they kept moving forward. Rain lashed against their faces, but neither stopped. "Life will try to push you back," Kareem shouted over the storm. "People will doubt you. Fear will try to paralyze you. But you must keep going." The young man gritted his teeth and pushed harder. His arms burned, but he refused to stop. For the first time, he wasn't running. He was fighting. Lightning split the sky, and a massive wave loomed ahead. The young man's eyes widened in fear. "We're going to capsize." Kareem's voice was firm. "Only if we stop rowing." The wave crashed down, but their boat sliced through it. Water splashed over them, drenching their clothes, but the boat stayed afloat. The young man gasped for breath, looking at Kareem in disbelief. "We made it through?" Kareem nodded. "Yes. And we will make it through every storm, as long as we don't stop." The storm raged on, but something had changed. The young man was no longer a passenger. He was a boatman now. Chapter 19. The calm after the storm. The storm finally began to subside. The furious wind that had howled through the night slowly faded, leaving only the gentle lapping of water against the boat. The young man and Kareem, drenched and exhausted, looked at each other. They were both breathing heavily, but the tension in the air had lifted. The sky, once dark and menacing, was beginning to show the first light of dawn. The clouds parted, revealing the soft glow of the sun. The river, though still rippling from the chaos, was no longer a violent force. It had settled into its natural rhythm. Kareem leaned back, wiping the rain from his face. "You did well," he said, his voice steady. The young man stared at the river, still processing everything that had happened. "I never thought I could do it. I never thought I could face something like that without giving up." Kareem smiled, his eyes warm. "That's the thing about storms. They don't just show us how strong we are, they show us that strength is not about never feeling fear. It's about how we choose to face it." The young man nodded, a sense of peace washing over him. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. The storm had passed, and he had survived it, not by avoiding it, but by embracing it. "We made it through together," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done it alone." Kareem's gaze softened. "No one does it alone. We all need someone to help guide us through the storm." As the boat glided through the calm waters, the young man felt something inside him shift. His journey wasn't just about escaping his past, it was about learning to live again, despite everything that had happened. The river had not only carried him through the storm, but it had also carried him back to himself. Chapter 20. A new horizon. By the time the boat reached the far shore, the sun was fully risen, casting golden light over the water. The river was peaceful now, as if the storm had never been. Kareem looked at the young man, who was no longer trembling. He was calm, his eyes clear. "You've come a long way," Kareem said. "But this is just the beginning. There will be other storms, other challenges. But remember this, every storm you survive makes you stronger for the next one." The young man nodded, stepping out of the boat. He looked back at Kareem, his heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "For everything. For helping me see that I don't have to be afraid anymore." Kareem smiled, the lines on his face softening with the wisdom of years. "It was not me who helped you. It was you who found the strength within yourself." With that, the young man turned and walked away, a new purpose in his step. He knew that the river, and Kareem's guidance, had shown him a path of resilience, of courage, and of hope. As Kareem watched him disappear into the distance, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey as a boatman had always been about more than just crossing the river. It was about helping others find their way, just as he had found his own. He picked up his oars and began to row, the gentle current carrying him forward. The sun was shining brightly now, and the river stretched out before him, endless, like the possibilities of life itself. And with every stroke of the oars, he knew that no matter what the future held, he was ready to face it. Chapter 21, The Return of the Boatman. Years passed, and the seasons changed. The young man, now older, had walked many paths and crossed many rivers, both literal and metaphorical. He had carried the lessons of the boatman, Kareem, deep within him, lessons about strength, resilience, and the power of facing one's fears. But life, as it always does, continued to challenge him. He found himself standing once again on the banks of the river, staring at the calm water that stretched out before him. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow across the surface. It was beautiful, but it wasn't the same river he had crossed all those years ago. His thoughts wandered back to Kareem. The old boatman had taught him everything he knew, but after that stormy night, they had parted ways. Kareem had disappeared into the horizon as quietly as he had entered the young man's life. And now, the young man, who had long ago shed his old fears, had become a man who understood the river's rhythm as well as the back of his hand. But something was missing. He realized he had not yet learned everything. There was still something the river had to teach him. The boatman had always told him that storms were part of the journey, but what about the calm? How does one navigate life when there is no storm to survive? How does one keep going when everything is peaceful? As the sun dipped lower, he heard the sound of a boat approaching from behind. The familiar rhythm of the oars struck a chord deep within him. He turned around, expecting to see a fellow traveler, but was shocked to see the very man who had taught him everything, Kareem. The boatman's eyes were as wise and as steady as ever, his face weathered by time but his spirit unchanged. "You've returned," the young man said, surprised. Kareem nodded with a gentle smile. "Yes. I've been watching you." "Watching me?" the young man asked, confused. Kareem stepped off the boat, his presence calm and reassuring. "You've learned to row through the storms, my friend. But now, I see you're struggling with the calm." The young man looked down at the river, uncertain of how to respond. "I don't know what to do now. The storms are no longer here, and I'm left with nothing. I feel lost." Kareem chuckled softly. "You think the river is calm, but it's only the surface. Beneath the stillness, there's always movement. Life, too, is never truly still. You've faced storms. Now it's time to learn how to embrace peace and purpose in the still moments." The young man frowned, trying to understand. "But how do I find purpose when nothing is challenging me anymore?" Kareem sat beside him on the bank, his hands resting on his knees. "The greatest challenge, my friend, is not fighting the storm. It's learning how to live fully in the quiet. The calm gives you a chance to reflect, to grow, and to chart a new course. A new adventure." The young man looked at the river. He had spent his life running from difficulty, fearing the storm. But now, he was faced with something even more challenging, peace. "What if I don't know what comes next?" he asked, a hint of doubt in his voice. Kareem smiled, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "Then trust the river. Trust yourself. Life doesn't always give you answers, but it will always show you the way if you're willing to listen. The young man nodded, feeling something shift within him. For the first time, he realized that life wasn't about chasing the next storm or waiting for the next challenge. It was about embracing both the storms and the calm, and finding meaning in every moment in between. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Kareem stood up, ready to return to his boat. "Remember, my friend, the river will always guide you. Just as it guided me, and just as it guided you. It's up to you to keep rowing, whether in the storm or in the calm." With that, the old boatman stepped back into his boat and began to row away, disappearing into the horizon once more. The young man stood there for a long time, watching the river. He knew that life would continue to bring him challenges, but he also knew that he now had the strength to face whatever came. He had learned from the storms, and now, he was ready to embrace the quiet moments that would shape the next chapter of his life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the young man smiled. He had found his way. Chapter 22, The Call of the Horizon. Days passed since the old boatman, Kareem, had left. The young man, now truly a man of the river, spent his time on the water, alone but not lonely. He had learned the art of listening to the currents, of finding the rhythm of life not just in the storms but in the quiet moments as well. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, the young man stood at the edge of the river, looking out at the horizon. There was something in the air today, an unfamiliar pull, a sense of restlessness. For so long, his life had been defined by survival. He had survived the storms, the challenges, the struggles. But now, there was a different question echoing in his mind: what was he living for? The river, which had once been a force of chaos and fear, had become his home. It had taught him everything he knew about resilience, strength, and patience. But it was now time for him to learn something else: what to do with the peace that had come after the storms. As he stood lost in thought, a boat appeared on the horizon. The young man squinted, trying to make out the figure inside. As it drew closer, he could see that it was a familiar face, a young woman, rowing steadily toward him. She looked to be in her late 20s, with dark hair flowing behind her as she maneuvered the boat with precision. Her eyes were focused, her movements calm and confident. When the boat finally reached the shore, the woman tied it securely to the dock and stepped onto the land. She looked at the young man with a smile. "You're the boatman, aren't you?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity. He nodded. "I am. But I've been more of a student than a teacher until now." The woman's eyes sparkled. "Well, it seems you've learned well. I've heard tales of a man who rode through storms and faced life's challenges head-on. I've come to learn from you." The young man was surprised. "From me?" She nodded. "I've been through my own storms that have left me lost, unsure of which way to turn. I've heard that you've learned how to navigate not only the river but life itself. Can you teach me how to find my way?" The young man smiled softly, realizing that his own journey had come full circle. He had learned from Kareem, and now it was his turn to pass on those lessons. "Of course," he said, motioning to the boat. "But before we start, you must first understand one thing: the river is always changing. It never stays the same. Life, too, is like that. The storms will come, and the calm will follow. But the question is, will you be ready for both?" The woman nodded, her expression serious. "I'm ready." "Then let's begin," he said, gesturing for her to join him on the boat. As they both rowed together, the young man felt a deep sense of purpose stirring within him. This was the next chapter of his journey, not just surviving, but helping others find their way. The river had always been a place of lessons, and now it was time for him to pass those lessons on. Together, they rowed into the unknown, guided not by the storms, but by the knowledge that the horizon was not a place to reach, it was a journey to live. Chapter 23, The River of Change. As the young man and the woman rowed through the calm river, the rhythmic sound of the oars cutting through the water seemed to create a peaceful harmony between them. The woman, still unfamiliar with the quiet pull of the river, watched the young man closely. He moved with the fluidity of someone who had spent years learning from the water. There was a grace to his every stroke, a calmness in his movements that spoke of a life lived in deep understanding of both nature and self. They rowed for hours, talking little but communicating through the shared rhythm of their work. The young man occasionally glanced over at the woman to see how she was doing. Her hands were steady on the oars, but her face showed a flicker of uncertainty. The river, so peaceful on the surface, seemed to hold hidden challenges, much like life itself. Finally, after a long stretch of silence, the woman spoke. Her voice was soft, but there was a quiet intensity to it. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that I will never find my way. That the storms will come again, and I will be lost." The young man paused in his rowing and turned to face her. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that reminded him of his own early struggles. He had once been that person, lost and afraid of what the future held. But he had found his way, step by step, with the guidance of the river and the lessons it had taught him. "Fear is natural," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's the river's way of reminding us that we're alive. But you must understand that fear is not something to fight, it's something to learn from. The river has taught me that." The woman looked at him, intrigued. "How do you mean?" "The river doesn't fear the storm," he explained. "It simply flows through it. The storm may shake its surface, but beneath the turmoil, the current continues to move forward. Life is the same. When the storms come, and they will come, you must trust the current. Trust that you will reach the other side." The woman absorbed his words, but the doubt in her eyes didn't fade completely. "And what if I can't? What if I drown in the storm?" The young man smiled gently, rowing with ease once more. "Then you learn to swim. The river never leaves you stranded, it always teaches you how to navigate it. But first, you must accept that the journey is not about avoiding the storm. It's about embracing it when it comes, knowing that it will pass, and that you will be stronger for having faced it." The woman sat in silence for a moment, contemplating his words. Then, slowly, she began to row again, her strokes a little more confident. It was as if something inside her had shifted, and for the first time, she began to trust herself, just as the young man had learned to trust the river. They continued their journey, passing through the winding bends of the river, the sun now dipping lower in the sky. Chapter 23, The River of Change. As the young man and the woman rowed through the calm river, the rhythmic sound of the oars cutting through the water seemed to create a peaceful harmony between them. The woman, still unfamiliar with the quiet pull of the river, watched the young man closely. He moved with the fluidity of someone who had spent years learning from the water. There was a grace to his every stroke, a calmness in his movements that spoke of a life lived in deep understanding of both nature and self. They rowed for hours, talking little but communicating through the shared rhythm of their work. The young man occasionally glanced over at the woman to see how she was doing. Her hands were steady on the oars, but her face showed a flicker of uncertainty. The river, so peaceful on the surface, seemed to hold hidden challenges, much like life itself. Finally, after a long stretch of silence, the woman spoke. Her voice was soft, but there was a quiet intensity to it. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that I will never find my way. That the storms will come again, and I will be lost." The young man paused in his rowing and turned to face her. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that reminded him of his own early struggles. He had once been that person, lost and afraid of what the future held. But he had found his way, step by step, with the guidance of the river and the lessons it had taught him. "Fear is natural," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's the river's way of reminding us that we're alive. But you must understand that fear is not something to fight, it's something to learn from. The river has taught me that." The woman looked at him, intrigued. "How do you mean?" "The river doesn't fear the storm," he explained. "It simply flows through it. The storm may shake its surface, but beneath the turmoil, the current continues to move forward. Life is the same. When the storms come, and they will come, you must trust the current. Trust that you will reach the other side. The woman absorbed his words, but the doubt in her eyes didn't fade completely. "And what if I can't? What if I drown in the storm?" The young man smiled gently, rowing with ease once more. "Then you learn to swim. The river never leaves you stranded, it always teaches you how to navigate it. But first, you must accept that the journey is not about avoiding the storm. It's about embracing it when it comes, knowing that it will pass, and that you will be stronger for having faced it." The woman sat in silence for a moment, contemplating his words. Then, slowly, she began to row again, her strokes a little more confident. It was as if something inside her had shifted, and for the first time, she began to trust herself, just as the young man had learned to trust the river. They continued their journey, passing through the winding bends of the river, the sun now dipping lower in the sky. The horizon was a soft, glowing line in the distance, a reminder that there was always more to see, always more to learn. As the day drew to a close, the young man could feel the shift in the air. The calm of the river was now a comfort, not a challenge. The woman, too, seemed more at ease. She was no longer afraid of the river's depth, nor of the storms that might come. She had learned the most important lesson of all, that it was not the storms that defined her, but how she chose to face them. The boat continued to glide smoothly across the water, and the two of them, though silent, shared an understanding that could not be put into words. They had become part of the river, and the river had become part of them. As the boat drifted into the dusk, the young man felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that he had not only found his own peace, but was now helping someone else find theirs. The river, he realized, was more than just a path to be crossed. It was a teacher, a guide, and a friend. And it had more lessons to offer than he had ever imagined. Chapter 24. The storm returns the next morning. As the sun rose over the river, the air felt different. There was a shift, a subtle tension in the atmosphere. The woman, now more at ease with the boat and the river, felt it too. Her movements were less hesitant, and the fear that had once gripped her was fading with each passing day. Yet, this new calmness was tinged with a sense of anticipation, as though the river was about to reveal a deeper truth. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice low, as she glanced up at the sky. The young man nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Yes. The wind is picking up. A storm is coming." A ripple of uncertainty passed through the woman's eyes. She had learned to trust the river, but the thought of facing another storm, especially now that she had just begun to feel at peace, unsettled her. "Are we ready for this?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. The young man's expression softened, and he gave a reassuring smile. "The storm is never the problem. It's what you do when it arrives that matters. We've learned to sail through calm waters, but now we must learn to navigate the rough ones. The river will guide us, as it always has." The wind began to howl, and the river's surface rippled with an increasing intensity. It wasn't long before dark clouds began to gather in the sky, casting shadows over the water. The storm was imminent, and the boatman could feel the change in the air. He had faced many storms before, but this one felt different. It was as though the river itself was testing them, testing their growth. "Prepare yourself," he said firmly, as he tightened his grip on the oars. "This storm is a test, but it is also an opportunity. Remember what we've learned, the river doesn't fight the storm, it flows through it." As the first raindrops began to fall, the woman gripped the edge of the boat, her heart racing. The river, which had once been a comfort, now felt like a force beyond her control. The wind whipped through the air, and the water churned, threatening to capsize their small boat. She tried to row with him, but her movements were shaky. The storm had come on quickly, and the waves crashed against the boat, pushing them further off course. Panic gripped her chest as she fought to maintain control. "Hold steady," the young man shouted over the roar of the wind. "Focus on the rhythm. Don't let the storm dictate your movements." Despite the chaos, the young man's voice remained calm, a beacon of reassurance in the midst of the storm. The woman, remembering the lessons he had taught her, focused on his words. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breathing, and then she began to row with him, feeling the rhythm of the boat and the current. The storm raged on, the winds howling and the rain pouring down in torrents, but they were no longer afraid. The woman could feel it, the connection between herself and the river. She had become one with the boat, with the water, and with the storm. The young man, too, was unwavering. His experience had taught him that the storm was not the enemy, it was part of the river's cycle. The key was to stay grounded, to trust in the strength of the river, and to keep moving forward. They rode through the storm, each stroke a testament to their resilience. The boat rocked dangerously at times, but it held firm. The storm didn't seem as powerful anymore, it was simply another force of nature, another challenge to overcome. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the storm began to subside. The wind softened, the rain slowed, and the dark clouds parted to reveal the pale light of the sun breaking through. The river, though still turbulent, had calmed. The young man and the woman were both soaked, exhausted, and breathless, but there was a quiet satisfaction in their eyes. The woman looked at him, her face a mix of awe and gratitude. "We did it," she whispered, as if speaking to herself more than to him. The young man nodded, his eyes reflecting a deep sense of peace. "We did. And now, you've learned what you needed to. The storm doesn't break us, it teaches us. It shows us who we are when everything else seems to be falling apart." The woman smiled, her heart full of both relief and newfound strength. She had faced the storm, and it had not defeated her. In fact, it had made her stronger. The young man turned the boat toward the shore, and they sailed back in silence, the calm now stretching before them like an open road. The horizon, once again clear, beckoned them onward. And as they approached the shore, the woman knew one thing for certain: the river had changed her. She had faced the storm, and she had survived it. But more than that, she had learned to trust the journey, no matter where the river would take her next. Chapter 25, the final crossing. As the boat glided gently toward the shore, the woman felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. The storm was behind them now, and the river, once a source of fear and uncertainty, had become her greatest teacher. The young man's steady presence beside her had transformed her understanding of both herself and the world around her. She had crossed many rivers in her life, both literal and metaphorical, but none had been as significant as the one she had just navigated. They landed quietly on the river bank, the morning sun casting its golden light over the water. The young man helped her disembark, his movements still graceful and precise. Together, they walked away from the river, a shared silence between them, for silence that spoke volumes. When they reached the edge of the river, the young man stopped and turned to face her. There was a look of contentment in his eyes, a reflection of the journey they had both undertaken. "You have come far," he said, his voice low but filled with admiration. "Not just across the river, but in yourself. You've learned what I have always known: the storm is not something to fear, but something to embrace. The river teaches us that there is always a way forward, no matter how fierce the waters may seem." The woman stood still, her heart full. She had learned so much in such a short time, but the most important lesson was that her journey was far from over. The river was always there, flowing, guiding, and teaching. "I feel different," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "The fear is gone. I understand now, it's not about avoiding challenges or storms, but about learning to move through them, with patience and trust." The young man smiled, nodding. "You've understood the essence of the river. And now, you must carry that knowledge with you as you continue your journey." They stood there for a moment, watching the river flow peacefully before them. It was hard to say goodbye to something that had become so much a part of their lives. But the young man knew that it was time for the woman to continue on her own path, just as it was time for him to move forward, carrying the wisdom he had gained through years of experience. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice full of gratitude. "For everything." The young man bowed his head in acknowledgement, his heart swelling with pride. "The river has done its work. Now, it's your turn to carry it forward." And with that, they parted ways. As the woman walked away from the river, she felt a sense of freedom that she had never known before. The weight of her fears, the doubts that had once chained her, had all been washed away by the storm. She felt lighter, more connected to herself and the world around her. There would be more challenges, more storms, but she knew now that she was capable of facing them. She was no longer afraid of what lay ahead because she had learned to trust both the journey and herself. The river, in all its beauty and danger, had been her teacher, and she had learned it well. Now, she could move forward, with the wisdom of the water in her heart, knowing that no matter what came next, she would be ready. The final lesson. As the woman disappeared into the distance, the young man stood at the riverbank for a while, watching her figure fade into the horizon. He knew that the river had given her the most important gift, the ability to face whatever lay ahead with strength and grace. For the boatman, this journey had not just been about guiding someone across a river. It had been about sharing a deeper truth, the truth that the path to peace is not always smooth, but it is always worth traveling. The river, with its unpredictable currents and hidden depths, had taught him the value of perseverance, the power of patience, and the importance of trusting the flow of life. As the day faded into evening, the young man made his way back to his boat, the same boat that had carried him through countless storms, each one leaving behind its own lesson. With a final glance at the river, he pushed his boat back into the water, ready for the next journey. He knew that life, like the river, was ever-changing, ever-moving. And no matter where the current took him, he would always remember the lessons he had learned and the people he had helped along the way. The river would continue to flow, and so would he. This is the final chapter of the story. It represents the completion of a transformative journey for both the young man and the woman, filled with lessons about trust, perseverance, and growth. The river, both literal and metaphorical, serves as the perfect backdrop for this tale of self-discovery.